Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and appreciate being invited. And so, what I'm going to go ahead and do is launch my screen here. So, stand by while I get that dialogue happening here. So, again, my name's Dave Ellison, W7UUU. I've been a ham for a very long time, since 1974. Got my general in 75 and extra in 97. And what this presentation is really all about is the shack fire, of course, because I think everybody kind of wants to see, pictures of that sort of thing. I mean, it's something we all fear, not just in shacks and in garages and whatnot, but our homes and anything else, any other location we know and love. And so I learned a lot of lessons along the way, as Mel pointed out, in rebuilding. And so there's sort of a subtext to this. It's the shack fire and rebirth with the lessons learned, but also the concepts and approach that I came up with for designing what I consider to be an ideal shack. And it's a large space, and I understand that, and I fully grant that. But a lot of these ideas can be applied in a small shack too. A 10 by 10 room, 10 by 12 room. Your typical ham shack kind of a space. A lot of the things that I did in this particular rebuild could come into play into any shack space. But what we're going to cover in the presentation is the shack fire or the shack before the fire on October 25th, 2020. Then we're going to look at the fire itself, what caused it, the immediate aftermath, kind of the whole nitty gritty of the fire. Lots of pictures in that section. Then the clean out and redesign. How we had to go about cleaning all the muck out and identifying the stuff that could possibly be repaired, restored, or whatever at a later date. But then most importantly, doing the redesign. We'll cover some of the layout considerations, and I'll have a neat little software app that I'm going to show you where you can get that was very inexpensive and helped a lot in the layout considerations. And very importantly, we're going to cover issues of safety, power, and cabling considerations as well. And that's where I learned a lot of lessons in this, and there'll be some very telling photos that you're going to see as this unfolds. And then the final section of it is the completion and sort of the final layout of the shack as it sits today, which I'm not in right now. I, for some reason, cannot seem to get a decent internet connection out there, even though I've got very fast Wi-Fi. So I can't, unfortunately, have my camera in that space. But so just to give you kind of an overview of where we're talking about, this is just from a drone view about 300 feet up. So it's that top building there, right, kind of in the clear. You can see my tower about the 11 o'clock position and the house at about the 7 o'clock position. So that kind of puts things into scale of the building that we're talking about, which is right in the center of the picture. So I was very fortunate when we moved here 4 years ago that my wife we've never been garage park the car people. So she said, just take the whole thing, because it was a derelict building when we moved in, and I did a lot of rebuild on it to make it cozy and turned it into this. We came in and we did sheetrock the ceiling, and just kind of made it nice and cozy. And I've been a Heathkit fan for a long time. I know we have a few other Heathkit fans in the group. And so I was really into rebuilding old Heathkits, restoring them, getting them back on the air. I ran a special event back in 2017 called K1T. It was my call sign for the 70th anniversary of the first electronic Heathkit. So I was, very Heathkit-centric station. Had my library. It wasn't a fancy space. It was a big space, but it wasn't fancy. It was 2 bays of the garage, which the current shack is as well, with the third space now being where the car parks. And I'd gone through all of these radios, restored or repaired them as needed to get them on the air. I was very, very proud of them, and I had a lot of gear that was near and dear to me that was out in this shack. 47 years of being a ham, you tend to acquire a lot of stuff, and I've always had a philosophy of it: if it doesn't work, it doesn't belong in the shack. So everything in these pictures was functional gear and was up and running and could be rotated into position. And a lot of it covered, other eras. I've always enjoyed the radios of the past as well. So not all just Heathkits. Also had modern rigs too, of course. It also served as something of a man cave with a big screen and a little sofa. And my wife and I would come out and bring our doggy out and watch movies and, just enjoy the space outside of the radio realm, or she'd watch a movie and knit while I did radio. The main operating position, you can see there's a wide range of generations of gear that are present there. So it's just something I've always liked to do, to have lots of different eras of radios, and this is the main position where I could use a patch bay and just switch any of the radios into play, and I enjoyed using that space a lot. A small workbench area that I built out at the back. It was kind of rough and tumble when we moved in, and I built it out with Formica. I made a nice workbench space with a computer screen to look at schematics and whatnot. And then I had my museum library area, where these were kind of the showpiece, fully restored radios of different eras and vintages that were really kind of like museum piece kind of rigs that I was real proud of, and they were quite shiny. And of course, everything you see in these pictures, by the way, was all pretty much destroyed in the fire. Just another view of the Heath kits. And as I've done over many years, I've always had a shack in motion. It never stays the same. So I'm always rotating radios in from other parts of the shack to just play with different radios in different ways. Big CW nuts, so a lot of CW rigs. So that brings us to Sunday, October 25th, 2020. This is when kind of everything changed in the shack. I had been playing the CQ Worldwide contest that was going that weekend, sideband contest. And actually, I just made a video on my 7300 as the contest was ending, because I always get a kick out of how the bands die the minute a contest ends. So I was doing this little video at 23:58. So, of course, that tells you it's right before 5 o'clock local time. And we were waiting for the Seahawks game to start, and I abandoned doing the video, and I turned around to the big TV, and I had a nice fire going in the wood stove. Had nothing to do with the fire later. And I took a picture of the TV because my wife wouldn't believe me. The Hawks weren't on. It was still the World Series. So that was just a timestamp for me. So I know that it was at about 5:15 that I was going to leave the room and go show the wife and say, hey, what channel is the game on tonight? Obviously not that one. Just note those boxes behind on the left, and there's a cable behind on the right. Those kind of come into play a little bit later. And so I went in the house. We were going to put some chicken in the microwave and grab the doggy and come out to the radio room and watch the game. When we looked out the kitchen window, and pretty much this is what we saw. Smoke was just absolutely billowing out. And I ran out there and tried to open the door, which don't do that. I know now why. Learned very quickly that the place was completely on fire inside. And so within about 8 minutes, we had the fire trucks were there. And we live where there's no fire hydrants, like many of you probably do. So they had to bring in 5 trucks just to have the quantity of water that they could potentially need. So they valiantly fought the fire quickly. And what they discovered right off the bat is that since I had sheetrocked the ceiling, that let's cut a great big hole in the ceiling and stuff 3 hoses down in it, and we'll fill the entire ceiling space with 40,000 gallons of really nasty water with firefighting foam and whatever else in it. And it's lake water too. They suck out of the lake. So it's nasty water with all kinds of contaminants and firefighting foam. But it did the trick. 50,000 gallons of water will cause a ceiling to collapse quite quickly and drop all that water onto the fire. So they did a big favor because it destroyed my radio room by doing this. But at the same time, they were able to save the structure. And that's why they explained to me that they use that approach. It's one of the approaches that they have available to them, of course. So these are the pictures that are the immediate aftermath. The bright white light is from the fire trucks. So you can kind of see this is me sticking in there where I'm not supposed to be yet, but I'll be damned if I'm not going to take pictures of my own mess in disaster. This is the 3rd bay, which now is where the car will park. But at that time, it was kind of a dry kitchen, so to speak. It was everything a kitchen is except no running water. It had counters and cabinets and fridge and freezer and all that. It was kind of our party central room for having people over and doing things in the radio room as a social event. And you'll notice that intrepid little wood stove that you saw earlier, I just started a nice cozy fire in there to watch the game. And that darn thing was just having just a little heyday in there doing its thing. Had nothing to do with the fire. It just stayed burning the whole time. In fact, the fire marshal came in, and he was staring at that, and he was just kind of scratching his head like I had been. That's me to the left of him there, thinking this must have been the cause of the fire, but it wasn't. We'll get to that in a minute here, but he was as astonished as I was. So I grabbed the fireman. I said, "Could somebody please come in here and remove the fire from this fire pit? I don't want to see any fire right now." So they did that very quickly. So next morning, we're now looking at the aftermath. So you kind of remember all those pictures, all the TV, which is off to the left there, and all those nicely restored radios. And in fact, here's a close-up of the TV, and to put it in perspective, there's a little blue book DVD set that was on that counter, and so you kind of see that big black blob to the right there. That is the 60-inch TV. Just not even a day later. It's not even 24 hours later. So it gives you kind of a visual of where it went. And looking back across the room, just where all of the ceiling insulation and everything else has just collapsed onto the floor, along with all of those many thousands of gallons of really nasty, acidy water that just dumped into everything. And as many of us know, Heathkit radios all have 10,000 little holes in them for airflow, and well, they also are water ingress points as well. So every one of those beautiful old Heathkits and most of the other radios were inundated with that goo. And unfortunately, the insurance company wouldn't allow me to touch anything for about 2 weeks. So everything sat in that acrid, nasty, acidic bath for about a week and a half, 2 weeks before I could get in there and start removing anything. So that kind of started not too much the next day, because the investigator wanted to clear some space, so we started moving some things around to kind of see where we were really at. Pardon the phone ringing there. Sorry about that. And this picture here just shows where the big hole in the ceiling erupted, where the 40,000 gallons dumped down into the room. In a lot of areas in the space, the radio equipment, parts and pieces and tubes and boxes of parts were burned beyond recognition. But this picture is kind of interesting. This is the fire investigator that a few days later who was in investigating the cause of the fire. And he couldn't care less about the wood stove. He was looking in the corner over there. And I'll show you a better view. What caught his eye is that shape of the burn. And anybody that has ever talked to a fire investigator, what you learn about that shape, and I learned from this event, is that's where they go. That's the first place they go in the room. So back up real quick to his slide here. He immediately went to that corner to where he saw that V shape, because that's where the fire begins, and that's where it burns up and out. And generally, in just about every case, right at the apex of that V shape is where the cause of the fire is going to be. And in this case, that apex of the V shape was right smack behind the TV. And if you think back to that picture where I said, remember those boxes and that cable, well, that cable is what he's pulling out right there. That is that cable that's hanging down. And it was an old power strip that I've been packing around for many years because it was long. It was about 15 feet long, power strip. That's not legal anymore, I've learned, but I'd been using it for years because it was long and it worked perfectly in that corner. And so here is the actual cause of the fire, as determined by the fire marshal and by the investigator, was none other than that power strip. Basically a cheap Chinese plastic power strip. And it has a surge suppression device in it called a metal oxide varistor. And that little device, when they fail, one of their failure modes is to blast flame, essentially, almost like a little Bic lighter. If you go on YouTube, you can find videos where you can see MOVs in that particular failure mode. And it shot out that little gap right there on the power strip. And that's how it ignited all those cardboard boxes on fire. So the MOV, metal oxide varistor, they're extremely common. They're in almost everything. And they're an okay surge diversion device, Their concept is they're a semiconductor, and they divert the surge energy to ground or neutral, supposedly moving it safely away. And for the most part, they work. About 95% of the time, they work just fine, and they can handle that. But they also deteriorate, and then they can fail. And one of their modes of failure is they can short out partially, not enough to blow a circuit breaker, but enough to generate massive amounts of heat. In other words, they become a heating coil. And in the case of this metal oxide varistor's failure, that's exactly what happened. And if you do a little Googling about MOVs and power strips, you'll find that the U.S. State Department back in the 1980s actually outlawed MOV-based devices of any kind for the State Department, because the embassy in Grenada burned down, just like my garage burned down. Same exact thing. It was a plastic power strip with an MOV. So that was kind of one of the big warnings there, and we'll touch on that when we get to the redesign of the shack. But if you've got plastic power strips like that, and if they say they're a surge suppressor, you are in the risk category. It's not a very strong risk, but when it does fail, it fails in a way that causes the kind of garbage that I've been dealing with for the last year and a half. So give that some consideration. We've since gotten rid of every single, well, the next day got rid of every single plastic power strip in our entire house entirely. So this brings us into the next phase with the clean out. And there's me again in basically a poor man's hazmat suit. Really, really nasty. The acidic, corrosive goo that's part of that water they use on the fire is not fit to breathe at all. It would almost knock you over if you tried to go in without a true respirator, not a K95 or anything, but an actual hazmat level respirator. And so this was a full week later that we were getting in there. So it was very nasty doing the clean out. Had a couple of friends come in, and we just started getting with the wheelbarrow and just hauling everything out into piles, trying to separate it into absolute, complete, destroyed garbage, stuff that has absolutely no potential for rebuilding or anything, and then separating out the stuff that could potentially still have some value. At this point, I didn't know how the insurance company would treat me. So I wanted to save everything that could be saved, just in case maybe I could recover something out of this. So this is the very sad pile of all of the radios that you saw in those early photos. Basically everything in the room that wasn't completely consumed by fire is in that picture. And some of the devices, there's an ICO 753 and a couple Kenwoods. And you can see, like on the Yaesu rotor, you can see that was a brand new rotator that I had just bought 6 months earlier, and those were all in the higher levels where the heat was pretty intense. And a lot of people will look at these radios, and I was kind of taken aback by a number of responses by people saying, "Oh, well, that can be cleaned up and restored." I had just repainted that cabinet. That was a totally restored transmitter when it was in the radio room. But what people don't realize is when you have a fire and they dump that foam-based firefighting water and all the lake water and whatever else is in it, that it causes almost instantaneous corrosion of anything metal that it touches. So that's the inside of that SB401 transmitter. Now, granted, it still had the original capacitors in it, but it worked great. It was in perfect operating condition. I had done an alignment on it. And that rust you see on the power transformer, that extends all the way down onto the circuit board, and it's completely eaten through it. It's as if somebody built it with acid core solder. So that is not a restorable unit. Some of the pieces can be saved, but there's nothing that can be done with that circuit board. So you really can't just go into that pile of radios and hope that everything will be repairable. It just can't. So at this juncture, we kind of all realized that I'm looking at clean slate time. We were starting to deal with the insurance company, and voila, ended up with a completely empty 3-car garage. And by the grace of those amazing firefighters, they saved the structure. We only had a few of the ceiling trusses that burned, and we were able to completely rebuild from an existing building. So everything inside was destroyed, but we were able to save the 4 walls, and that worked out well because my insurance would have been really taxed if we had to rebuild all 4 walls and put a all new truss system in. So we just had to do a new roof and a bunch of replacement trusses. So they came in, and that guy in that picture is standing underneath where some of the burn trusses are, and some of those had to be individually replaced when they did the new roof. Once all that was done, we got in, and the crew did the treatment that covers the smoke-filled, nasty-filled timbers, because if you don't do that, you'll smell that stuff every warm day for the rest of time. You will smell that nasty, nasty smell. And started just kind of figuring out where to go next. So that took us to building a design. And this is a program called Sweet Home 3D for PC that I found on Amazon during the winter last year when I was starting to do this redesign. And I'll tell you what, it's a super intuitive, super easy program. So you might want to make note of that if you ever want to do any design work of a space where you want to have a grid and a 3D view of what you're designing. This is all customizable. It's super intuitive, super easy to use. I'm not pitching the company. I'm just saying I'm not a CAD guy, and I was able to figure this thing out in one evening. And I was actually starting to build designs for my new radio room. Now, granted, a lot of the shapes and furniture and things like that you have to put in are their goofy custom or built-in furniture, that kind of thing. But once it's all up and running, hit play here. So this is actually a little video where you can see your room in 3D. And once I discovered what I could do with this program, it allowed me to really start laying out bookcases and note the fire extinguishers, and figure out where everything was actually going to end up in the room. And it really ended up being pretty much like my 3D projection made it look like it was going to. I was really astounded. So it's called Sweet Home 3D software. It's $15 on Amazon, and it's a great tool for doing this kind of layout work where you can really figure out what things are going to look like when you're done. So we worked through that whole design, figured out where the car was going to go, and built that into the software just by pulling the car in and measuring and figuring out about what is right, where's the walls going to go. And so, bam, then we can start building our walls and getting the space built out. And they still hadn't replaced the original window that was broken out in the fire. It's just, you can see it's got studs through it, and they were going to patch the siding on the back. So we installed 2 new windows and redid the entire front of the garage with all new doors, new roof, and just kind of really started moving along on rebuilding the space. And so I started working on cable management. And one of the things that I really struggled with, and I think a lot of us struggle with as hams, is how do I bring all those antenna cables into the shack and deal with them, deal with a lighting panel? How do I do that stuff and make it be manageable later? So I came up with the idea of using this 3-inch PVC conduit with the big square box that's called an LB. And the LB was about $30, and then it extends down to a pipe in the shack where I was able to bring all the coax in from the tower and the other antennas. So just an idea for getting wire into the cable where I'm going straight in from the lightning suppression panel to the ground grid and all of that, coming straight into the shack with a very nice, nicely finished pipe that just drops down to bring all those cables down so they're not all unsightly hanging through a hole like I had before. Another thing that I think really works well in doing a redesign for any kind of a shack space like this. I had a lot of time on my hands not playing radio last winter, and so I spent a lot of time playing with just Microsoft Publisher and downloading graphics of the actual radios that I plan to repopulate the new shack with and source new radios to put in there. So, if you just take some time and just kind of lay all that stuff out of where things are going to go, it goes a very long ways towards figuring out how you're going to actually build the space. And I just found that just going through that exercise, I avoided all the pitfalls I've done in the past of build the space randomly and then hope everything fits. In this case, I was able to do both at the same time, design the space, but also figure out in scaled images where everything is going to fit. The other thing I decided to do, and granted, this is a luxury that we don't all get to do, and that is to go to the bare studs and put in new boxes. But I was very gun shy about the idea of power strips, and so what I decided to do was have nothing but outlets and many circuits. I think we ended up with 8 circuits that feed the shack space, not including the 240 circuits for the amplifier. So the electrician, he was absolutely gobsmacked when he saw the wiring requirements for a garage. He had never seen a garage wired with so many outlets. But once I explained the whole thing, he got it. And just a little tip I learned, those yellow circles there are showing, rather than use the electrician symbols that I learned as an apprentice back in the 80s, I actually printed out outlet-shaped pictures on my printer. And stapled them to the wall. So, I could go in and look at it, wife could go in and look at it, and really visualize it, really think about it. And it made a lot more difference than just doing it on paper, but to actually visualize where all of these outlets are going to be. So, all told, we ended up doing a lot of wiring. When you've got open studs, if you have that luxury, it's a great time to put in everything. They put in everything you can possibly think of. And I did just that. Cable is cheap, and my own labor is cheap. So I got in and just spent many days pulling cable, a lot of data cable. I've got security cameras, security alarm system, data cables back to the house to bring the internet in, and just cables going to different locations. I did data patch panels through the whole room so that I can patch cat cables from any wall to any other wall on an as-need basis. Another thing that I thought was something to think ahead that I'd never really thought about was, things like I'm going to put screens on the wall. And, the screens have gotten very inexpensive these days. And I wanted to have a screen back on that wall that would have a geochron. I always wanted a geochron. And so, thinking about that ahead of time and planning for some backing, where you're going to put the mount. I bought the mount, figured out how is it going to mount to the wall, how am I going to get cables to it. So it gives you a chance to think about those things, about where I'm going to get those cables and hide everything so that it's all behind the screen and I've got a proper mounting. Same thing up at the front of the room. I had decided that we were going to rebuild the man cave idea with a large screen TV. And so same thing here. I didn't know where that mount was going to go, so I just went crazy with some 2x10s and just put in 2x10 sections in between the studs everywhere that the bracket could possibly need to go. I didn't know exactly where, but I knew I'd have solid wood under the sheetrock to bolt into. And same thing again, just thinking about the outlet locations, the cabling locations, data cable locations. That blue canister you see, that's the pressure tank for our well system. So that lives in the garage, and that all had to be replaced as well. It was all destroyed in the fire. So that all had its own custom cabinet that had to be built. And then there's just a close up of the mounting that I did for the screen. And again, I mean, this is all fancy stuff in the sense that that's a 75-inch screen and whatnot. But I think the concepts apply. If you have the opportunity to do this stuff, you can really make a neat installation if you just think about all this stuff ahead of time and plan the mounting and plan the cable routing so that everything goes where it's supposed to go, and just think about it ahead of time. And I only say this because I've done so many designs in my life where I just bowled my way through, and I wish I had taken some time and done it better. And this time I decided to really try to focus on that. Another consideration that I worked closely with the electrician on that was important to me, and that is that all of my high voltage wiring and all of my data cabling were made to be separate. We're pulled to be at least 16 inches apart. All of the power cable passes at right angles to all the data cable and vice versa. So if you think about that kind of stuff, you're going to have a lot less chance of bringing in AC power line induction into data cables or into RF cables. And of course, local codes come into play in that as well, but this was all done by a professional electrician at my direction. So one of the funniest things I did, and I know that there's people in this camp that think, well, I've never had an amplifier, and I'm never going to have an amplifier. And I was that guy for 46 years. I was the I'm never going to have an amplifier guy. But I thought, okay, what the hell? I'm building this whole thing out. I put in outlets. So I put in a 240 volt circuit that jumps to 3 separate outlets. So I can move an amp to 3 locations, or have 3 amplifiers, 2 of which aren't on, only one at a time on. But wired it for a standard Leviton 20 amp 240 outlet. Just put it in. If you've got the opportunity and the walls are open, that's a great time to do it. Even if you never use it, it was $6 for the outlet and not much to have the cable installed. Other considerations, things like data cable ports. I didn't know what I would use them for, but I've found all kinds of things, knowing that I've got 8 conductors, 1 jack at a time, that I can distribute stuff anywhere in the room. And it's ended up being a godsend in being able to send things like HDMI over cat cable to send monitor signals. So I can send the output of my radio. I can send it to that great big TV on the wall. I can put the geochron on any screen in the room. Just by changing patch cables, I can patch it anywhere that it needs to go. And then same thing with, small linear power supplies that I have a lot of. I allowed for lots of outlets for that kind of thing. Another really important thing that I made myself do, and I'm really glad I did, in every single switch and every single outlet, while it's easy to move around the room, while you can actually physically trace the wires and whatnot, is note their circuit numbers, so that when you want to kill something and you go look at that outlet, you don't flip the wrong switch and dump your computer when all you were trying to do was turn off a lamp on the other side of the room. We've all done that, a timer 40. So this saved that from happening. And do good labels in the panel. The electrician did this really cruddy job of labeling everything, and I said, no, I want it better than that. So I went in and made really nice labels myself and affixed them so that they're high contrast, easy to read in a dim room. And if you want to know what outlet that amplifier on, by gosh, it's breakers 12 and 14 is what turns that circuit off. Biggest single piece of advice that I have out of this entire fiasco is only use metal power strips. Whether they have MOVs in them or not is an endless debate. Don't care about it. They won't burn your house down if they're not made of plastic. They might flame out internally. They might do other bad things, but they won't burn your house down. And so we went out and we bought a full case of decent quality metal power strips, any brand of your choosing. That's a debate for another day. Just don't get plastic ones. And right after the fire, within 24 hours of the fire, I had sourced every single plastic outlet in the entire house and pulled them all out, cut all of the ends off, and threw them into the fire dumpster so that nobody could pull them out and just throw them back on the wall. Those things, I will never have a plastic power strip in my world ever again, except for just short-term, just portable use. You're in a hotel room and you want to run a few things, whatever. But if you're going to tuck it behind a counter and it's going to stay there for years, you're just asking for a fire. And this whole presentation is testimony to that. Another luxury, of course, of having a new construction space is insulate everything. I didn't do that when I did the sheetrock first. I thought, oh, heck, I'm just putting in a wood stove. I can make it as hot as I want. Yeah, well, that didn't work out so well. Took forever to get the room hot, and then once it was hot, it took forever to cool it down. And in the winter, the summertime, I just baked in there because I didn't have adequate insulation. So we insulated like crazy. Another reason to make sure your wiring is done properly in the ceiling. That wire you see hanging there, that was for his light. That's not me. So all the wiring that we had up there was all out of his way, and we blew in 39 inches of insulation. Think about air conditioning. Put in HVAC systems. They've become very, very affordable. We put in, it's called a Daikin brand mini split, where you've got the gizmo on the wall and the gizmo outside that's the heat pump. And it works absolutely fabulously. It's very, very low energy consuming. So, think about that stuff too. We were going to just throw an air conditioner in the wall and put in some space heaters, and the builder convinced me to shift some of the insurance money around to go with a mini split, and I wouldn't regret it. And by gosh, I don't. Another consideration where we are, there's pros and cons to this. Putting bars on the window. We're in a kind of a poor county out here in Kitsap County, the area we're in. And not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but our crime rate's a little bit higher than the state average. And we're pretty remote where the house is. And I just thought, man, all those thousands of dollars worth of gear that are going to be in here. And this is on the north side of the garage that I won't see from the house. You can sneak up to from through the woods. I decided to go with bars. You cannot do this if it's a residential space. Obviously, that's not allowed by any code, but you can in a garage. But think about it. It did limit my ability to maybe jump out a window if I had to, but I did put 2 doors into the space where I only had 1 before. So something to think about, security doors, security bars on the windows. Security camera systems have also gotten dirt cheap. And I actively chose not to use Wi-Fi. Why add another RF field into already an RF sensitive area called a ham shack? So a lot of that data cabling was for the PoE wired cameras. And this system was $700 with, they show 8 in the picture, but the one I got was 16 channels, and I bought extra cameras for it, I guess is what I did. And it works fabulously. So I'm able to pull up all the cameras on the shack, and I was able to add a few since they're network cameras. I could just jump on the network router in the house, and they are visible to the recorder out in the radio room. I can view it on my phone, anywhere. So something you can think about. They're very affordable now. They're super easy to install anymore. It's not like it was 10 years ago where these things never worked right. I couldn't speak more highly of how well they work. Security systems are also dirt cheap, $89 for all of that. It's goofy as all get out to program. I won't deny that. It's Chinese. The book is in Chinglish, and it was devilishly annoying to figure out, to say the least, the programming. But again, I had nothing better to do last winter and last February 2021 on a cold, snowy day. I sat in the kitchen and I went through the manual and watched a bunch of YouTubes and got it all programmed, and it works fabulously. I don't even think about it anymore. But dirt cheap, and it uses a little GSM chip. It's $5 a month, and it texts my cell phone if anything happens. That's all it does, but dirt cheap and works great. Just something to think about. Another strong consideration that you should think about if you've got any source of water in the room. Water sensors are also very, very inexpensive now. I bought a pair for $15 on Amazon, and they scream like bloody murder when they detect water, which is very, very shallow detection range. They're amazing, and since I've got the pressure tank in there, I figured why not. So again, these all kind of just idea flow of things that I thought about that maybe you've never thought about, and you're thinking in the back of your head, ooh, I do have a hot water heater in my shack. Imagine if that thing leaked. That might be bad. So for $15, buy a pair of these things and put some batteries in them. It should go without saying, fire extinguishers. And I bought the good kind. I stepped up and paid the big bucks for the Kidda ABCs. They're the industry standard 4-pound, UL listed, refillable, blah, blah, blah. And I bought 2 3-packs, and we distributed them all over we got 3 in the house and 3 in the shack. Had I been in the shack when the fire happened, had I had a fire extinguisher there, I might have been able to save the entire fiasco from happening. So they're cheap. I recommend them wholeheartedly. I'm never within more than about 70 feet of a fire extinguisher in my home and my shack. So that brings us up to kind of the last phase of the presentation here is the fun stuff. Now we're done with all the building, all the walls and all that, and we've got this beautiful blank slate now to fill. And I really did feel that sense when I started moving in a year ago. August. It was early August I started to move in and starting to think about the next phase. How am I going to make all this stuff work? And So by gosh, there we are. I put my 43-inch screen on the wall that would end up being the Geochron, but until it is, it's got internet built into it. Put it on YouTube and put on rock and roll videos on YouTube and watch concerts while I'm working on the room. It was a kind of a nice little creature comfort, and those things are so inexpensive. Bought it at Walmart for about $300, so they're very affordable. So it's kind of a neat thing. It was also really cool to see that $14 piece of software really come to fruition as I'm starting to put things together and realize that, man, everything that I predicted in the software was coming to life. And it was a really fun feeling with that cheap little piece of software. I swear, if I ever did a room redesign anywhere, even an existing room, I would probably use that software to lay it all out. Part of all that planning ahead with outlets and whatnot, my 1943 U.S. Navy Bremerton Naval Shipyard desk that I put a Formica top over the steel just to make it smooth. But I got my workbench back installed. That was not in the fire. Fortunately, it was not on site. It was in storage. So I brought that back to be my new workbench, and had thought about things like dummy load connection down underneath, so I can send dummy load down. I've got coaxial cable. Think about that, running that back to a patch bay. How often do you want to throw a transmitter on the workbench and be able to work on it? You need a dummy load. Why drag all that stuff out if it can very easily and inexpensively incorporated in if you're doing that kind of a rebuild? So just another view of the bench, how it nicely fit in with the scheme of the room. Added cabinets, never have enough cabinets. They were dirt cheap. They're like IKEA knockdown, build it yourself cabinets. They were like $69 per double cabinet, something like that, and about an hour to build. And bam, they're on the wall. Very cheap, very easy to do. Operating tables. There's lots of options in operating tables, and what I did is one way to do it, but there's 1,000 ways to do it. What we chose to go with, wife and I, is we were able to source knockdown, build it yourself. They're called commercial dining tables, and they were sold by Home Depot, and they're steel legs and frames and real wood tops with a nice veneer, a laminate veneer, but they're a real wood top, and they seemed to be the absolute perfect size, and they were on sale at the time for I think $180 a piece, which seemed very reasonable for what we were doing. And my lovely and gracious wife, Ann, N7ANN, she was very instrumental in helping put all this stuff together and helping me beef these things up onto some folding tables to build them up in the air. So we started to get kind of the layout of how it all goes together, and 4 of the tables together seemed to match my drawings very well. We sourced tables that would fit the drawings. And then it was just a matter of just off the shelf what we could get. This was COVID, so we got what we could get for wood, and it ended up just being kind of oddball assortments, but we bought what they had and reasonably priced, and went to town with cardboard boxes. So, it's just the idea of just get some wood in there and figure out where all your radios are going to go. Get a measuring tape and graph paper and confirm those original drawings that you do, and use just mock-ups to build the space. Now, this is one thing that came as kind of an afterthought, and that was to have a walking space behind. In my case, it's 24 inches. But this is where, even if you're doing a small room, and you're going to see in a minute the amazingness of having that walking space behind the operating desk. Some really amazingness came out of that I wasn't expecting. So as we kept building the mock-ups up, then it got to the stage of cutting all the pieces of wood and cutting the 4x4 supports, laying it all out essentially as what would be a kit. None of these are actually nailed or screwed together. They're just sitting there being measured and make sure they're going to fit. Then we went to town with stain on them and made them look all nice and pretty. And next thing you know, they're all installed, ready for the rear of the gear to start coming into place. So remember that access behind. This came to me as a whim one evening. I thought, holy cow, what if I built a walking path that would go behind the operating desk, 12 inches wide, 14-inch spacing on the supports, that I could pass cables underneath and walk around the entire radio room. How cool might that be? And I back to Home Depot, got some more cheap, this is just cheap pine boards, 12-inch pine boards, and 2x4s, and just a couple of rattle cans of gray spray paint later. And there we have my, what I call gangplanks, that give me an easy walking access behind all of the operating areas. And it ends up being an absolute godsend. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not tweaking on something behind a radio. And you know, this is a big room, and I get that, but you could do this in even a small radio room. It doesn't have to be 24 inches. But if you could even eke out a 12-inch space, anything you can fit behind and come up with a planking system. The only caveat that I had is I did have to source a whole bunch of commercial grade. These are very high grade single point extension cables that go from the outlets to the plug-in devices. But they were a little bit of money. They were like $9 a piece, but they're UL listed and very high quality American made. To allow me to extend all of the devices up to the outlets without having any power strips. The gangplanks have been a huge benefit. Patch bays. If you're doing a shack design, I've in the last few years become a big fan of using low-level patch bays with BNCs, and that allows me to take the outputs of the various radios, the FTDX, and so on, and send those anywhere in the radio room. So I can bring other radios into the patch bay and send them out to antennas, and vice versa. I also built a panel on the bottom that gives me just, you know, instant close-up access if I want 12 volts to run a little QRP Labs QRP rig and just patch that into the patch bay. It's easy to do. It's cheap to do. It's something that anybody can do in a shack and end up with a setup where you've got all of your radio patching is all right in front of you as an easy access thing. For all the antenna switching, I went with a high level panel that allows me to switch out to the Elecraft amplifier, and then I can switch. I can change cables at the kilowatt level. I opted not to do switches, even though I've got some switches there that I can use, because if you go with the patch bay, you can do a lot more things a lot more quickly in the long run. So I went with a patch bay where every single antenna all comes into its own SO239 bulkhead connector. And then I can, the patch 1 and patch 2 you see in the middle panel there, that goes back to the patch bay at the radio position. So I can send anything over here that I want, send it out to an antenna, send it to the amplifier, whatever. And then I've got a bench 1 and bench 2 down at the bottom there that allow me to send antennas over to the workbench. So just an idea. It's not an expensive thing to do, and it makes a big change in a ham shack design. Another thing that was important to me that I think that you know, anybody designing ham shack should think about eye levelness. And I see a lot of these beautiful shack pictures on QRZ all the time, and I see monitors that are like way up in the air over your head. And I get it, in smaller spaces, you do what you have to do, and sometimes that's necessary. But if you can focus on keeping the stuff you use the most in a field of view where you're not turning your head up and down more than necessary, that's just something that I think is just kind of a common sense aspect. And you'll see that that carries over to the far left, where I've got my VHF gear for where I do VHF contesting, UHF contesting, to the center position, which is the main HF position, then over to the Drake radios and Heath kits, and then all the way to the end to the what I call the novice corner, where I have typical novice transmitters paired up with the old Collins receiver. And everything important is all at eye level. And I just thought that was an important design consideration. Think about furniture. I spent a little extra, and I got a Serta brand chair. You know, I do a lot of contesting, and contesting is butt-in chair time. And, you know, if you're going to have your butt-in chair doing radio for hours upon hours, why have it in a chair that makes your butt unhappy? So I went around and found office supply chairs where I could find one that I could felt like I could sit in that thing for hours. So all in all, the whole thing all came together as a complete station. I mean, I've done some more stuff since this picture was taken. More wall art things have happened, but I don't think that I would have achieved the kind of station that I was trying to achieve had I not planned all of this stuff out. And I've been very proud of the fact that I was able to pull it off in a way that makes it look like I spent a hell of a lot more than I did, just by, I think, being clever about how I did things and coming up with ways that make it a far more effective space as I was replacing the radios and pulling them in and making it make a lot more sense into the space. So that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you. I hope it didn't go too long, but I do appreciate you watching. And my contact information, I am a big guy on QRZ. I'm one of the administrators and the head moderator. I'm not hard to find, so I'm good on QRZ. My email address. If you have any questions or want to reach out, and then I'll go ahead and open it to you guys if you have any questions at the end here.